Let's talk about what happens beyond the manual.
Hello everybody, my name is Bryan Garner. I'm with a company called Manual Makers. And based on the name, you may have already guessed that what our company does is makes manuals, as well as guides and playbooks and knowledge bases and tools and checklists and training guides for mainly franchise companies, whether that's restaurants or home services or professional services. Everybody has knowledge content, and every company writes that stuff down. And there are lots of benefits to it, which I'll get into here in just a second. But Manual Makers is here to help guide folks, not just in the creation of each individual piece, but how they all work together. Our goal is to help you to create and publish and manage this information in a way that makes your life easier, so that your documentation is an asset that helps you scale instead of a liability that you're always worried about. As the managing partner of Manual Makers and also the content strategist, my background is kind of twofold. For the last, I hate to say it, 30 years, I've been a website developer. So I began doing that in the really early days of the web. And a thing that used to happen on the web at the time was, if I want to update something that is on all of the pages, how do I do that? Take the logo. If I need to update the logo on my website, in the old days, you used to have to change it on every single page. And there was no way to update it in one spot and have it appear on every page. There were ways to do that, but we had to figure out what those ways were. Over time, websites really became very good at that. Organizational documentation did not keep pace with that. So that's one of the things that I bring to this particular aspect, is the ability to manage content in a way that helps us to update once and publish everywhere. The other side of my experience is that I was an early employee of Planet Smoothie, and Planet Smoothie was part of Innovative Brands and Raving Brands. So I was around franchise sales, franchise support, creating franchises, all aspects of franchising for brands like PJ's Coffee, Planet Smoothie, Moe's Southwest Grill, Shane's Rib Shack, really a bunch of brands. We began working with those guys to get more customers to come in more often and spend more money on each visit. That was my focus up until around 2008. And then we gradually moved a little bit more into the operations side of things. But the underlying content strategy didn't change. We have to have a way to document our standards so that we can speak one to many instead of one to one. So early brands talk one-to-one to every new franchisee, and they explain everything as that franchisee comes on. Eventually, when we're successful, we have to be able to talk to several franchisees at once. Optimally, those franchises will have the ability to self-service some of the more basic information. Now's when we need our documentation to do more, to leverage our support people, and to make the highest and best use of their time. Documentation does that. And if it's done well, then it saves you money, saves you time, and it improves your customer service. That's what we attempt to do at Manual Makers, is work with your teams to help them do what they do better. When it comes to documentation, whether this be for training purposes or self-service knowledge information or for compliance, I think everybody understands the benefits of it. It's why we create manuals in the first place. It's why we assign somebody to write stuff down. It improves brand consistency across all kinds of different businesses. It improves compliance so that folks are all reaching the same standards. It helps with safety information. It enables users to self-help information. And when they can do that, then it decreases the support costs that are required to answer the same questions again and again and again. We hear a couple of things pretty consistently. No one reads my stuff. How come no one ever reads the manual? There are reasons for that, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. Another one is no one can ever find my stuff. We stick it in this garage, and it turns out no one knows where to find the manual or the guide or the playbook or the checklist, and how do I find my stuff? And the last one is that people read my stuff, but they're not convinced that it's accurate. So there's no credibility there. So people don't read, people can't find, and people aren't sure that what they're reading is accurate. And if you actually think about those last two, no one can find and people aren't sure if it's accurate, that might explain why no one reads. So we help companies go beyond those manuals. And that's what we're here to talk about today and throughout this podcast, is what happens beyond the manual. Nobody creates a manual that's incorrect. By the time you're done with it, everything in there is accurate up to the point that you wrote it down. And then you stick it up on a SharePoint or a Dropbox or a Google Drive, or you send it out by email and people save it to their hard drives. And then over time, as things change and you don't, then that accuracy erodes. And all of a sudden, the things that you wrote down 6 months ago are no longer true. And that's because it didn't evolve. So there's this push and pull within the manual world that is more than just writing. You can't just create a manual. You have to publish it in a way that your teams can find it, that your audiences know where to look for it. You have to manage it in a way so that when the operations change, the document changes. Your business plan plans for both change and growth. It's what you've written down. So how come your manuals don't? You write it in Microsoft Word and then you PDF it, and there you go. It's this monument to whatever it was you did at that particular time. 6 months later, 1 year later, when you have new vendors, you have new processes, you've actually probably created new products and maybe even changed the direction of who you sell to. All of those things have changed, and yet the person who created the manual has moved on. They've been promoted. They left the company. Nobody knows where to find the document. How tough is it to change? The way that you maintain documentation so that people can find it and believe it and use it so that you can scale and grow and support your teams in a more effective manner has to do with not just how you've created it, but how you published it and manage it. So today, in this version of Beyond the Manual, we're going to talk about the ecosystem that maintains your documentation, because your documentation persists. Unlike an ad, you can't just run it for a little while and then it goes away and then we create a new one and we put it up and then we create another one and we put it up. These documents span years, which means that we have to maintain them. They're more like a building. So as we go beyond the manual, then I want to talk about kind of an ecosystem that has 3 equal parts: create, publish, and manage. And those 3 things together determine whether or not people will read your stuff, where they find your stuff, and whether or not they believe your stuff. So let's start with what it means to create. Content strategy involves getting the right information to the right people at the right time. Before you ever create anything, you should identify 2 things. Who am I talking to, and what do I want them to do after reading it? So many times when folks create a manual or a guide or a playbook, they become way too detailed, thinking about somebody might want. Don't forget to tell them this. Somebody might need to know. They don't. They really don't. What you need to do is say who might need to know, not somebody. Specifically, name them. The franchisor needs to know X. And the other thing is what it is that you would like them to do. I would like them to hold their labor costs below X%. I want them to know that their food costs should be between X and Y. Those are the types of things that you need people to know. You can't simply throw it out there and expect that they want to read it. When somebody wants to know what time it is, you can't tell them how to make a watch. Nobody reads to know. they read to do. So very often when we create manuals, when other people create manuals or guides or playbooks, they're throwing the kitchen sink into it because somebody might want. The result turns into a 600-page gorilla of a manual that no one reads. So you want to know why people don't read your manual? It doesn't talk to me. It doesn't tell me what I need to know. And it's way too big. It tells me all kinds of things that I don't want to know. So all of those things go into how you create something and whether or not people read it. And if it's really big, then that affects how you publish it. So now you've got a 600-page gorilla that you've converted to a PDF, but that makes it very difficult to make it a website, which means it can't be searchable. So now I've got this giant PDF that I have to have metadata around to make it more searchable, which makes it more findable. And that's why people can't find your stuff, because it's too big. And then we get to manage. And if it's just a PDF, or if it's created in Adobe Illustrator or some other high-tech system that is all about how something looks rather than what it says, then it's much more difficult to manage. And frankly, you need a little bit of governance. So all of those things determine the ecosystem, whether or not people read your stuff, whether they can find your stuff, and whether or not they believe your stuff. This is a pretty good time to talk about the other three things that go into this ecosystem, which is strategy, technology, and governance. Nobody likes rules, but it's rules that help you to keep this content from becoming chaotic. Content chaos is everything from I've created too much stuff to I've got it spread across too many channels to I've created duplicate content, my naming convention is wrong, I don't have an archive. All of that creates content chaos. And nobody has it at first because you just got that one document. But after you go beyond the manual a little bit, where you start parsing out your checklists, you start creating a construction manual or a local store marketing manual or a training guide and all of these things. Now you've got multiple documents, but they all sort of reuse the same content again and again and again. When you've got that, then you now have to update this content in multiple documents for multiple formats, one in Microsoft Word, one in a PDF, one online, one in this poster. So now you've updated it 4 times across 5 different documents, 20 different versions. What happens when you change the number 5 to 6? Do you have to change that 20 times? What happens if you change it in only 14 places? Now you're wrong in several places. Now you've got accuracy erosion. All of this creates content chaos. And it's awful. And every company has content chaos to some degree. And the whole point behind content management, content strategy, is to limit that chaos, to rein it in a little bit so that you're in control. That's what we mean by an ecosystem, and how create and publish and manage plays into that system is what determines whether or not your content works for you or works against you. Is it an asset or is it a liability? When we create, we hope that it's an asset, and we give you the tools and provide the roadmap so that it is an asset long term and can change with you. Let's talk about the individual pieces a little bit and then how to put them together to calm some of this content chaos. So when we create, some of the best practices there are topic-based authoring. This video is actually kind of an example of topic-based authoring. In that, while I may be speaking for 15 minutes or 20 minutes, we've got modules within it. So now I can take a little piece of what I say, whether it be about create, and I can, or manage or publish, and I can add it to a blog post later. I can use it as a promotional item. I can put it up on LinkedIn. And now I've got several 1-minute pieces, 2-minute pieces that I can use individually, like Legos. When you create your documentation, topic-based authoring helps you to do that so that you can reassemble these pieces for different audiences. Sometimes just for the franchisor, sometimes for the marketing person, sometimes for the legal team, sometimes for the finance team. We can pull them together and put them into different documents. And then when we change once, we update everywhere, or at least we know where everything is. So creating in a modular fashion helps you not only to create more easily because it saves time, it's easier to approve, it costs less to create topic-based, but also it's easier to manage. So longer term, when somebody needs to make a change, they go to the subject matter expert who created that. The way you create something affects how it becomes managed. It also affects how you publish it. We will take this and we will edit down a couple of pieces and publish on a blog post or on our own knowledge base, depending on whether I'm using it for training or promotion or to educate folks like you, right? That's one of the best practices for creation. Another best practice comes down to whether you want it to be centralized or you need to have distributed authorship, which means in a small organization, it means that Bryan writes the marketing section, and it means that Charlotte writes the operations section, and it means that Chase writes the finance section. Each of those then requires a little bit of governance on top of it to say that everybody needs to write it in the same way. We have the same style guide. We all three have determined that we're going to use bullet points as much as we can. All of us have decided that we're going to use Google Docs instead of Microsoft Word so that it's all exactly the same and it can be normalized and put together and published easily, which means that it can be managed a little bit more easily. Another best practice is to have an editorial calendar. Who's in charge of this? How often does it get checked? And to make sure that you're looking at your information at least once per year, probably more often than that if you're in the early stages of things. What is the frequency of change? Who should be doing it? An editorial calendar will help you to keep track of all that. And then the last best practice for all of this is to have a librarian. Every document has an author, but now when you're talking about moving beyond just a single manual, so that you have trainer's guides and trainees guides and a construction manual and a marketing manual, all of those things sort of move together, and you've got multiple authors, which requires a librarian. Who ensures that your style guide is being followed? Who ensures that the naming convention is correct? Everybody creates. Who removes the old stuff? The librarian should. So this is an opportunity for you to take hold of your content chaos and make sure that there's somebody responsible, somebody accountable, and somebody who can be there to ensure that everything has one unifying look, just like your brand does. So there are lots of benefits to actual documentation, and we at Manual Makers have taken kind of the same approach as we did as web developers, and that is that large websites, hundreds of pages, are managed with a content management system. And that means that if something changes, you can update it once, and you can change it once, and it updates in lots of different places. Organizational content is very similar to that. There are typically, hundreds and hundreds of documents or pages of documentation that all need to be managed. We take the approach that we should manage that in the same way that we manage websites, which is that we can update it in one place and the changes will happen across channels and across documents. So that's what Manual Makers does. We bring the 3-ring binders into the 21st century. We've changed how we create, we've changed how we publish, and we've changed how folks manage their information so that it makes it easier to maintain these documents over time. Everybody who creates a manual creates an accurate manual. When you write it, you've talked to the right people, you've written the right numbers, everybody's reviewed it, everybody is on the same page when you write that first operations manual. Your standard operations, your compliance pieces, your policies, your procedures, all of that is tied up in a nice, neat little bow. The challenge comes in when you begin to create information for different audiences, because the heart of content strategy is to get the right information to the right people at the right time. That information may be different for a line level employee than it is for an office manager. So you need possibly to have different documents or to have different channels for them. One may need to view it on a phone, another one on a desktop, another one in a printed piece. So we're going to get the right information to the right people at the right time. What that means is that you're going to take this larger document that you've created and begin to target it. So there may be a construction manual. or a finance operations manual or a local store marketing manual or a training guide or a trainee's guide, all sort of the same information written out into a different document for a different audience for a different objective. And this is really the heart of why we've begun a podcast. And that is what happens beyond the manual. The manual is a self-contained, pretty finite piece. We know what the edges are. But beyond the manual, that's where chaos reigns. That's when you've started to move into multiple audiences. And multiple audiences mean multiple channels. And that might mean that we're on the point of sale system, the POS. It might mean that we're in a knowledge base. It might mean that it's in a trainer's guide or possibly in a construction guide. The information now has taken on a life where it needs to be in different places. Then it's in Microsoft Word or in a Google Doc, but also in a PDF and also HTML and also printed and laminated and stuck on the line. So what happens when this information changes? And this is where chaos starts to become a problem, unless you manage it a little bit closely, unless you use best practices. And that's what we help clients do. When you get beyond the manual, then you get into, how do I publish this? Do I put it on Dropbox? Do I put it on Google Docs? Can I put it onto a web page? Should I send this to SharePoint? Should I email it to people? What happens when I email it to people and they save it to their hard drive? Now you've got multiple documents, multiple channels. Things are saved in different places, and it gets worse from there. We keep adding instead of pulling out. It's everyone's job to create, but whose job is it to eliminate? Whose job is it to remove duplicate content? Whose job is it to make sure that the training guide doesn't conflict with the operations manual that is given to all new managers? Whose job is it to ensure that the accuracy is the same on any given topic, not only over time, but then as it's published in several different documents throughout? That's what content chaos is, and every company experiences it. It's made worse by your naming convention, by your choice of file sharing. It's made worse based on whether you've determined to do centralized publishing or distributed authorship so that the subject matter experts can simply update their own documents and keep that up to date. All of this creates content chaos unless it is managed, unless it's wrangled in a little bit. Most people's solution, most companies' solution to the chaos that they envision or that they experience is to get more technology or to keep adding new things in order to clarify. So what happens is that in an attempt to solve this content chaos, we actually make it worse. And that happens, everybody does that. So what I'm here to do, what our company does, and the whole point of this particular podcast is to have episodes that help you to identify the root causes of some of this chaos and to work through via best practices and maybe a little technology, but usually strategy and some rules that don't cost anything that will help you to rein in the chaos and help your documents to work for you so that they're assets instead of against you and our liabilities. Best practices for helping to rein in chaos. The first thing you have to realize is that there are three different aspects to your chaos. There's how you've created, there's how you've published, and there's how you manage the information. And almost always, when we've gotten beyond the manual and we have multiple manuals and multiple audiences, multiple objectives, multiple documents, then what we find is that while every document needs an author, every library needs a librarian. All of these pieces come together for different audiences, different objectives. They're managed by different people. And remember that your authors have full-time jobs, and that this content management is a part-time gig for them. They don't do it well. They can create, So having a librarian to help people say, I need you to review this and make sure that it's up to date. I need you to take a look at this and talk with someone in operations because it looks like you guys are saying different things about the same topic. Having a librarian means that you're staying on brand. Your authors are writing in the voice of the brand that you spent a lot of money creating. Your librarians help to ensure that new documents are created and old documents are archived so that a search doesn't return 5 different versions of the same thing and then leaving it to the user to figure out which one is correct. So all of this information is really best managed by a librarian. That doesn't have to be a full-time job, but it is a role within your company. And it's somebody who understands not only the entire view of your information, but knows how to use the different tools that authors have been given. They understand what metadata is. So when they publish any particular document or any form or tool or whatever, that they're adding metadata to it so that it can be found. Otherwise, you have to teach that to every author. They understand that information changes over time and that every document should be reviewed somewhat frequently, at least once per year, maybe as often as once a quarter. This librarian manages an editorial calendar to make sure all of that is intact. The librarian really is the glue. They don't have to be the expert in every topic, but they do have to say this needs to be updated and they have to add metadata. They have to be the information resource for the distributed authors on how to publish properly, on how things fit together, on how to launch a new version, how to archive. So many times in so many organizations, it's everyone's job to create. And with distributed authoring tools, anybody can create a PowerPoint. Anybody can create a new Word doc or a form or a spreadsheet. Anybody can create and anybody can name and anybody can publish. But all of that adds to the chaos. Duplicate content, too much content, not enough archived content. All of that, again, creates more chaos for the users so that it makes it more difficult to find things. When it's more difficult to find things, they ask questions. When they ask the questions, they do it by phone, by email. It becomes search by email. Good content management, good content strategy gets beyond that. So over the next couple of episodes, what we plan to do is to talk about how to create documents, how to create information that is useful to your users, but is done in a way that can be published and managed going forward. We'll talk about how publication, management, and creation all sort of intertwine and one affects another. So we'll take those topic by topic. We'll go through best practices so that you can achieve the benefits of consistency, of compliance, of safety, of self-help, and to lower your support costs. You can bring everybody on the same page. You can make sure that your documents are an advantage to your company and not a liability to your company. And all of that is done through a bunch of pretty simple different best practices that help to tame the chaos for a little.